right, hello and welcome to episode 4 of Hearth and Home. I am your host, Casey Smith, realtor here in Des Moines, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Coast. So starting this bit off with the dad jokes, co-host, what do you got for us today?
Oh, you bet I do. You better believe I do. So, my son was chewing on electrical cords, so I had to ground him. He's doing better currently and conducting himself properly.
Well, do you think they allow loud laughing in Hawaii or just a low ha?
Well, have you ever tried archery blindfolded? You don't know what you're missing.
Well, one thing you won't be missing is the lowdown on home buying timelines. Whether you're buying a house for the first time or the fifth, you want to know how long it'll take. It's super important for any real estate investor or first-time home buyer to be familiar with the process of the closing of the sale of property. Whether you're buying a single-family home or a multifamily property, you need to understand and navigate the process of closing on that property.
Well, just like in sports, you always want to be on the offense during this process instead of the defense. You need to understand what to expect so you can set yourself up for success and actually get to closing. You'll also want to know what's reasonable in terms of the timeline.
Yeah, so you're ready to buy a house, but aren't sure how long this process will take? While each deal is different and can vary in a multitude of ways, for the most part, buying a house is pretty straightforward. And it can take about 30 to 60 days once under contract. Assuming that you're only taking out a loan to purchase your new home, you will have to follow some pretty typical guidelines. And now if you're planning to pay in cash, that's when it gives you a little bit more flexibility in deciding and removing some of these typical features that would go through if you were taking out a conventional loan. So going through some of these steps, Coast, why don't you start us off with the first one?
So step one is typically just saving up for the initial down payment, right? And this will be entirely dependent on your personal financial situation. For some special types of loans, you don't have to put any money down at all, which is really nice. This step will take no time. Think VA loans or special bank loan products where you have a conventional for 80% of the loan and then maybe an ARM for the other 20%. But most of the time, you should probably save about 5 to 20% of the purchase price as a down payment. And for an example, a home that you purchased for, let's say, $200,000, you would need anywhere from $10,000 to $40,000 saved as a down payment. Before you submit an offer, put all the money you have saved into a savings or checking account that you aren't touching until you close on that home. This will come into play later when it comes time for closing. For example, I had a lot of money just kind of sitting in Venmo and PayPal because I use those accounts quite a bit for a lot of the random stuff I did. I moved a large chunk from that account into my regular banking with the physical bank. And the bank was like, hey, what the heck is all this? Where did this come from kind of thing? So I was like, oh, I didn't think that would matter where I held my money. But it is actually really important, and the bank may see that as a yellow or red flag. So keeping it all in one account early on at the start of the process, that's going to be a huge lifesaver when it comes to later down the loan and not creating any problems.
So then moving to step 2, getting pre-approved for the loan. This is a process that's usually very simple and typically only takes about 24 hours. Whatever lender you choose is going to ask you some pretty simple qualifying questions about your financial situation. They'll want to know how much you make per month as an individual or as a household, depending on how you're planning to file. They're also going to want to know what recurring debt you have so they can kind of figure out some of that debt to income ratio that we had talked about in some of the previous episodes. Debts can be on other homes you own or car payments and even the credit card bills that we had talked about. All ways that you can build credit, but also could be detrimental if you have too much debt kind of floating out and about as it is. These aren't the only types of debts, just the most common ones. And then, after a short phone call with your lender, the bank will run a credit check to ensure that you are qualified.
The next step is a really fun one for most buyers, I'd say. It's when you go and look for the house specifically. This is another portion of the process that can very much influence your overall time spent in the process. Your time can vary widely depending on the market that you are in, the searching and how strict your criteria are. Sometimes we have to realize we have very strict criteria for ourselves, and sometimes, it's just not possible to get that absolutely perfect, miraculous house. Currently, we have about 2,400 homes in inventory around the Des Moines area, and that's still relatively low when we look back. So it's highly recommended that you spend some time in this phase of the process. While it is possible to find your perfect home in the first one that you look at, it's a great idea to see at least a few, so you have an idea of what you like and what you don't like in a home, because sometimes what you don't like is actually just as important as what you do like. Once you've seen a home or a few that you like, you should go by at different times of the day to see what the neighborhood is like in the morning, evening, and during high traffic times when people are really coming and going from their houses. This will give you a pretty good sense of the place where you are going to buy, because if it's a corner lot and you go at, I don't know, 10 a.m. or 2 p.m., not very high trafficked areas, but then all of a sudden 3 p.m. hits, 8 a.m., 5, 6 p.m., and it's just madness, and you have kids, and it's like, okay, well, this is actually a little scarier when I think about my kids just running around and there's just a ton of traffic. So good idea to check all that out.
In my mind, this is where the exciting part comes in. The submitting, the negotiating, and signing of the contract. It's, in my mind, just the best part, because there's so much back and forth. If you like haggling, it's a great time. The next step of the process to decide what you want to offer the seller as a purchase price. Then you'll have to determine whether you want to ask for closing costs, repair budgets, or any other contingencies that you might require. Your experienced realtor will be an expert in this process. They will get the offer written up for you to sign and submit it to the seller's agent. So, they do all that work on your behalf. That's part of the reason that you hire them in the first place. If the seller accepts your offer, that's awesome. A lot of the time, they'll come back with what is called a counteroffer. At this point, you can decide to accept their counter or make a counter of your own. There can be a lot of back and forth. Almost every part of the process is negotiable. That's an important point. Whether it's the beginning of it with the offer or even all the way through the end, if something happens to the house, if the inspection brings up items, all that jazz. There's a lot of room for negotiation. And then after the back and forth is finished, you get to sign the finalized contract and move into the escrow phase of buying the home.
When it comes to that final step of getting the loan to its final position, there are really quite a few steps to this process that make getting a loan just a tad bit frustrating. Remember that pre-approval letter that you had before you started looking for a home? Throw it away, because it really means nothing anymore. The bank is now going to take a deep dive into your financials and make sure that you haven't done anything that's worth financially disqualifying you since you got that letter. Like buying a brand new car that your income won't be able to support with a home loan. Those two things, that DTI, that's going to kill it. So they'll analyze your credit report in depth, assessing your credit score and overall financial health. At this stage, the lender will want to see your bank statements if you have not provided them already. Along with your personal information, the bank is going to want to know about the house. This part of the process is much longer than your financials, but will not require you to do very much, thankfully. A lot of that happens in the background as you're going. But overall, expect a time frame of about 2 to 4 weeks for your loan to get finalized. If everything is straightforward, it may take as little as around 10 days, give or take. In the end, you'll get a closing disclosure document from your lender, which will clearly state the type of loan you have been given and all the conditions within it. And it's very important. Well, your lender might give you a good idea of what's all in it, but if you're, kind of a stickler like I am sometimes, it's good to read the fine print on those, because sometimes it can have repercussions if you move houses too soon, or if you try to rent it out within like 6 months, like that can be a bad rap. You need to make sure that you talk with your lender and have a good understanding of what's in your contract.
Yep. And we're going to keep it a little short this time. That wraps up part 1. We're going to break this up into a little bit of a 2-parter. So next week, we'll cover things like title work, appraisal, inspection, and all the other fun things that happen after you fully execute the contract. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.